Ransom Eli Olds was born during the turmoil of the American Civil War, as were his eventual peers, William Durant of General Motors and Henry Ford. Ranny grew up in a small middle-class family of German stock in Geneva, Ohio. He was a thoughtful kid, a loner of sorts, whose father changed homes and jobs often, trying to make a better life for his family. During a post-war depression in 1880, Pliny F. Olds moved his family for the last time, north to Lansing, Michigan, where he opened a farm equipment repair shop. The family business expanded several times and within a few years was making and selling steam engines. Here, Ranny became fascinated with mechanical things. After completing high school and an accounting course, Ranny joined the factory staff as one of 7 workers. He was already an expert machinist. The P.F. Olds & Son factory was making a whopping dozen steam engines a year. Ransom's intense drive to produce a horseless carriage inspired him to work long hours. He soon became a larger force in the business than his older brother Wallace, who had been the son in the company's title. At 21, Ransom bought him out. He thirsted for news from Europe, where motorized vehicles preceded some American efforts. He studied new motor designs demonstrated at fairs. Spurred by business expansions and a wave of mechanical inventions at home and abroad, Ransom was ready to animate his many drawing board designs. By this time, the Olds factory was making smaller, more powerful steam engines that were fueled by gasoline. The so-called gasoline engine would be the company's mainstay over the next 5 years, fueling the industrial revolution that was consuming this country like wildfire. Steady engine sales gave Ransom the working capital to experiment. He knew how to make stationary steam-powered engines, so he built on what he knew. With help from a friend, whose father owned a carriage shop, Ransom's first self-propelled vehicle looked like 2 separate products fitted together: a carriage with large wooden spoke wheels and a steam engine. The same was true of Henry Ford's quadricycle. Bicycle-like with a small motor, it hinted of the obvious influence of his pals, the Wright brothers. As Ransom tested his 3-wheeler up and down Lansing streets, he dodged road apples and frightened horses pulling carriages.
The early years that I drove a car when I was the only man on the road, starting back to 1886, I expected to run away every time we went out for a ride.
The public, by and large, didn't share Ransom's vision for the practicality of his motor car. Despite continual demonstrations, most potential customers still preferred horses to his invention for several more years. In an interview late in life, Ransom insisted that early inventors had no idea that their automobiles would eventually replace those smelly oats eaters.
I felt as though that the horse was here to stay. In order to not scare horses, we went so far as to put the horse's head on the front of the dashboard in some cases, so that a horse would think it was a horse and wouldn't be scared to death.
There was no easy road. Early automobile owners were often ridiculed, had laws passed against them, and when they had a breakdown, detractors would commonly chide, "Get a horse." His first horseless carriage was powered by a steam engine. He tweaked and redesigned it with boundless energy. What he learned positioned him to become the first volume manufacturer of gasoline motor vehicles in America. With 23 Lansing employees making an amazing 400 gasoline-fired steam engines a year, it was time to incorporate the P.F. Olds & Sons business. His newest version was a 4-wheeler with 4-horsepower steam boiler engine that would go faster than most people could run, an astounding 15 miles per hour. When this machine was sold to a buyer in Bombay, India for $400, it became the first foreign export of a U.S.-built automobile. It also marked the first sale of a Michigan-made motorized vehicle. The emerging horseless carriage manufacturers around the world were in search of smaller, more portable engines. Ransom was convinced, like Carl Benz in Germany, and the Duryers in Massachusetts that the future lay in gasoline-fired internal combustion engines. The Oldsmotor testing went so well that he applied for a gasoline-fired vapor engine patent a year later. Ransom's first gas-powered automobile was another four-wheeler with tiller steering. Standard features were solid rubber tires, a two-passenger bench seat, a chain-drive two-speed transmission, and a 5-horsepower motor with a top end of 18 miles an hour. The race was on. Automobile developments were rapidly accelerating in Europe and the U.S. With occasional help from unlikely places, Ransom was credited with many automotive industry firsts.
In my internal combustion engines, I used a hot tube for a long time to ignite the mixture. Then I had a letter from the electrician at Sing Sing. He had charge of electric chairs. He had lots of time to experiment, and he could produce a spark inside the cylinder. So I told him to send on the device and I'd try it out. He sent it on and it worked. As far as I know, that is the starter of the spark plug.
With more improvements tested, Ransom applied for a second motorized vehicle patent in the fall of 1896. An expert marketeer, his plan detailed a simple, inexpensive, lightweight yet sturdy vehicle that took minimum power to operate. As the gasoline motor gained rapid acceptance in factories and on farms, Ransom accumulated nearly 90% ownership of the family business. Huge additional expansion was again needed to meet an unprecedented demand for engines. And the motor car market, which added to that demand, was beginning to look very promising. With backing from Lansing millionaires from timber and copper resources in northern Michigan, Ransom formed the Olds Motor Vehicle Company on August 21, 1897. That date is generally considered the birth of Oldsmobile, although the brand name didn't appear on cars until 4 years later. Ransom was now able to focus on building motor cars as a separate business from gasoline engines. At 36, he was now the manager and major stockholder. At the first meeting of the Olds Motor Vehicle Company, the board charged its manager, build one carriage in as nearly perfect a manner as possible and complete it at the earliest possible moment. Ransom intended to do just that. During its first year, 4 nearly perfect carriages were built. Although many different versions preceded this particular Olds motor car design, it started the company into continuous production. This centennial feat is rare. Despite the over 2,600 motor car companies that sprang up, most folded. The gas engine and motor vehicle businesses were merged into the Olds Motor Works, and for the first time, investors, not Ransom, controlled the business that his father had begun. This was the beginning of the end for Ransom at his namesake Oldsmobile. He just didn't have the cash. The constant need for more capital to cover rising overhead in the revolutionary automobile business was staggering. These financial considerations coaxed the company to Detroit, where Ransom found bigger investors. Detroit also offered a much larger support base, and although probably too small from the start, Ransom's 5-acre Detroit River site offered better access for shipping parts and products by water, rail, and road to national and international markets. The Lansing facilities were retained to produce much-needed engines. Totaling 100,000 square feet, 4 buildings suddenly sprang up in Detroit, becoming the first factory ever constructed specifically for manufacturing automobiles. When operations began at the Olds Motor Works, there were 100 workers on the Detroit payroll. So if the company was well capitalized, engine production was up, and orders for motor cars were coming in, what caused the abrupt return to Lansing after only 2 years on the Detroit River? For starters, the factory was destroyed by fire. A machinist strike soon after didn't help. And just 9 days after Ransom returned from vacation to find his factory in ashes, Lansing business and civic leaders made the Olds board an offer it couldn't refuse. For coming home, Oldsmotor Works will be given the former State Fairgrounds site, 50 acres on the Grand River near downtown Lansing. It was 10 times larger than the Detroit site. The demand for Olds motor cars was growing fast thanks to press reports, county fairs, promotional gimmicks, and advertising. Ransom's playful comparative ads pitted his motor cars against their biggest competitors, horses. Ransom was the P.T. Barnum of the fledgling auto industry.
I hired out to several fairs as an attraction and would run around in front of the grandstand between races. I also created teeter boards 60 feet long to demonstrate how nicely a car could be handled. And I also would run the car up on a low box and back it down onto a watch without breaking the crystal. That created a good deal of comment. What I was trying to prove was how neatly they could be handled.
Luckily, the foundry and the design plans for the most promising automobile, the curved dash runabout, were spared by the fire. All of Olds' resources were suddenly not enough to even consider meeting motorcar demands. So while the Lansing site was cranking out engines, the new Lansing factory was being built, and the Detroit factory was being rebuilt. Production in temporary space there suddenly soared from a handful of prototypes to 425 curved dash automobiles. Ransom bought engines from the Dodge brothers and transmissions from Leland and Faulkner when Olds couldn't produce enough of them. Outsourcing allowed Olds to make and sell enough motor cars to nearly meet demand while bringing in the cash needed to pay the help while expanding the business. This was the beginning of the supplier industry as we know it today. The Detroit factory also gave birth to the Oldsmobile nameplate in Ransom's $5 employee suggestion contest. The badge was affixed to Oldsmobile's first bread-and-butter car, the curved dash runabout. Perhaps the most significant achievement during the brief Detroit stay was that the Olds Motor Works had turned the financial corner. 60% of its income now came from automobile sales rather than from engines. The curved dash Oldsmobile was very streamlined for its day, with its wooden toboggan-like curved front end, a one-cylinder, 4-horsepower engine, and tiller steering. It weighed in at 650 pounds, sold for $1 a pound. It looked frail compared to a horse carriage, but the little Oldsmobile was strong and reliable. The U.S. Post Office agreed when it purchased a fleet of them as its first mail trucks, despite virtually no hard surface roads. The rebuilt Detroit factory made 4 curved dash runabouts a day. The huge new Lansing factory would soon be building 30 a day. Car chassis were moved from workstation to workstation on wooden platforms on casters. This practice was the first moving automotive production line, still in use today. In fact, Henry Ford paid Lansing a visit to learn about this revolutionary way of assembling cars. Despite the focus needed to keep both Detroit and Lansing operations on schedule, Ransom decided to send a curved dash runabout to the New York Auto Show in the winter of 1901. The open vehicle was driven there over muddy roads rather than by conventional train. The mud-crusted little stallion arrived after 7.5 days, averaging 14 miles per hour on 30 gallons of gas and 80 gallons of water. The runabout was the hit of the show. The Cleveland Olds dealer was so impressed that he ordered 1,000 of them on the spot, an entire year's production schedule. The significance of the return to Lansing was obvious. Olds could retain its Detroit financial backing and the plant there while getting a huge new site that would allow almost unlimited expansion. Ransom knew that racing continued to be a smart way to promote automobile ownership. People flocked to well-promoted races, like the one at Ormond Beach near Daytona in 1903. A modified curved dash Olds customized with rocket-like tanks set the world speed record, a blazing 54.38 miles per hour. Adding to the hype of the oceanfront event, a reporter dubbed the Olds entry the Pirate. Much later, stock car racing evolved on area beaches, and the first Daytona 500 in 1959 was won by Oldsmobile. Ransom's creativity, especially in racing events, not only sold a lot of Oldsmobiles, but popularized the automobile as the newest addition to American culture. But sadly, in a disagreement with his investors who wanted to produce more expensive touring cars, Ransom Olds left the company to start another in 1904. Continuing Ransom's promotional tradition, Oldsmobile sent 2 curved dash cars to race across the country to arrive in time for the National Good Roads Association convention in 1905. The group was trying to get congressional funding for a national highway and bridge system. Having fun with horse owners again, Olds nicknamed the cars Old Scout and Old Steady, supplied them with ropes, block and tackle, camping utensils, firearms, spare parts, gas and water cans, and sent them packing. There were only 250 miles of hard surface roads in the U.S. Old Scout looked like a horse run hard and put away wet when she arrived at the convention with little time to spare. It took 44 days to travel the nearly 4,000 miles, fraught with bridgeless rivers and the Rocky Mountains. Old Steady trotted in a few days later. That transcontinental race between New York City and Portland, Oregon, despite an almost total lack of roads, filling stations, restaurants, and hotels, helped convince the public that motor cars were, after all, practical inventions. Ironically, in 1904, as Ransom began his second car company in Lansing, the Rio Motor Car Company, people all over this country were singing a new song inspired by his little runabout.
Come away with me, Lucille, in my merry Oldsmobile. Down the road a light will fly, automobile bubbling, you and I. To the church we'll swiftly steal, then our wedding bells will peal. You can go as far as you like with me in my merry Oldsmobile.
Oldsmobile would survive without Ransom. In 1905, Olds Motor Works moved all Detroit operations to Lansing. By now, almost 12,000 curved dash Oldsmobiles had been sold. It was America's most popular car. In 1906, the company introduced its first medium-priced 4-cylinder automobile. Olds was expanding into the more expensive car market, offering more than just an economy model. At a New York City car show, Olds unveiled its first 6-cylinder engine in 1908. The new models also featured distinctive nickel-plated trim parts. These value-added touches helped put Oldsmobile in the upscale car business. Olds, however, began losing money with the big-ticket approach. 1908 also marked a unique turning point in the automobile industry. Detroiter William C. Durant organized the General Motors Corporation and proceeded to take one successful car company after another. Flint's Buick was Durant's first acquisition. Oldsmobile's financial problems were solved in November when it became GM's second car division. Having questionable success selling more expensive cars, GM nevertheless made that Oldsmobile's assignment. Olds' employment in Lansing was now over 1,000. The most impressive of these early Olds GM cars was the Limited. This touring car sported a 60-horsepower, 6-cylinder, 707 cubic inch engine, 42-inch tires, and a 40-gallon gas tank. The Limited was anything but when it came to its $5,000 sticker price. It was remarkable what people were now willing to pay for a classy motor car. The teen years saw Olds offering more expensive models along with stripped-down versions. Imposing names like Autocrat, Defender, Pacemaker, and even the Baby Olds accompanied cars that carried numbers-only titles like Model 44. The Baby Olds started at $1,295. In 1916, Olds sold 10,515 cars. Workers earned 50 cents an hour. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, Olds production doubled to nearly 22,000 vehicles. Car companies were asked to cut production in half the next year in order to produce war materiel. Olds eventually stopped all car production to produce Liberty aircraft engines. Mass production methods refined during the war meant more products for Americans, whose standards of living generally profited from the war. Olds built an amazing 40,000 vehicles in 1920, but sales dropped to half that the next year due to a depression. Many businesses were scuttled, and rumors flew that GM would drop Oldsmobile. Realizing a strong market still existed for a low-price automobile, Olds introduced its Model 30A six-cylinder car, which sold for only $750. Olds also built trucks. Counting all vehicles, output was over 35,000 units in '23. Keeping product quality despite these high outputs was a daily concern. To safeguard their jobs and company market position, Olds employees adopted a slogan, "Anything short of my best is not acceptable." They meant it. Oldsmobile continued its market position during the Roaring '20s and the '30s despite the drastic effects of the Great Depression. Hundreds of car companies fell from the market. From a humble 18 by 24-foot shop on Lansing's River Street, it took 38 years. But on September 30th, 1935, Oldsmobile built its 1 millionth car. Olds offered models with 6- and 8-cylinder engines, and for the first time in over 30 years, Oldsmobiles were produced outside the Lansing plant in Southgate, California. A year later, both Oldsmobile models were available with automatic safety transmissions with 4 forward speeds. It meant virtual freedom from the clutch pedal and manual shifting. The F-37 6-cylinder car sold for $790, the 8-cylinder for $100 more. In 1939, Olds started another revolution by equipping the 40 model year cars with hydromatic drive, the first fully automatic transmission available anywhere on a volume basis.
Here's a young lady who seems to think she could drive Mommy's car, and maybe she could at that. It's a new dynamic Oldsmobile with GM hydromatic drive, the fully proved feature that reduces all driving to its simplest terms. See? She steps on the gas, steers the car, and that's all she does. Gear shifting is completely automatic. There's no clutch pushing, not even a clutch pedal there. And hydromatic drive gives whirl-away performance, smooth pickup, as smooth as the smartly tailored lines of this new dynamic Oldsmobile. The smart way to go places is the Oldsmobile way, with GM hydromatic drive.
Just 6 years after the first 1 million car milestone, Olds produced its 2 millionth car. The distinction was short-lived. When the U.S. entered World War II, Olds factories halted standard operations to produce war materiel. Olds factories cranked out 48 million rounds of shells, 140,000 aircraft machine guns and tank cannons, nearly 350,000 high-precision aircraft engine parts, and 175 million pounds of military equipment parts. 4 times during the Second War to End All Wars, Oldsmobile received the Army-Navy E Award for effort for their quality commitment to the armed services. At war's end, our nation's attention turned to the home front. Old workers changed over the dies and went back to full production in October of 1945. But as the economy began to improve, Olds was suddenly idled for 4.5 months by a UAW strike against General Motors. Production resumed at Olds in April. At year's end, nearly 120,000 new Oldsmobiles had been made for post-war Americans who had been rationed and had gone without new cars for too long. Celebrating its golden anniversary in 1947, the 98 model was given a futuramic design and became the bestseller of the following year. Olds completely retooled its engine plant to produce the first post-war high-compression engine. 30 of these 135 horsepower rocket engines rolled off the line per hour. That number doubled later in '49. The rocket engine became Oldsmobile's signature for many years to come.
When you take the wheel of this Oldsmobile, there's a big new thrill for you. What a thrill to take the wheel of a rocket Oldsmobile.
The hottest number on the highway. The most talked about car in America. The famous Oldsmobile Holiday Coupe.
And I'm in a
When the high-performance Olds 88 series car debuted in 1949, including the Holiday Coupe, mid-year sales again hit a new high, nearly 270,000 cars. Indianapolis 500 owners were impressed. They immediately booked the muscle car to pace their Memorial Day event. Continuing Ransom Olds racing and promotion tradition, Oldsmobile was racking up impressive stats. Rocket 88 cars virtually owned NASCAR for 3 years in a row, taking 6 of 8 races in 1949. 2 more overwhelming national championships followed, with Olds taking 10 out of 19 races in 1950 and 20 of 41 races in '51. The international publicity helped fuel an unprecedented demand for more Oldsmobiles. Yet another assembly plant was built in Lansing. In no time flat, Olds was making 80 cars an hour. The summer of '50 also brought the Korean War and a new plant that manufactured jet engine parts. The 700,000 square foot jet plant on West Saginaw Street housed 4,000 workers, most of whom had never heard of a jet engine. None of this kind of manufacturing had ever been done at Olds before, so while the new factory was being built, temporary facilities were set up to familiarize Olds engineers with the advanced metallurgy needed for the GM contract. Olds also made 8.5 million bazooka rockets and another 8,500 tank cannons for our GIs. Civilian production was unaffected by the Korean conflict the first year. As a result, Olds also had its best production year ever, making over 370,000 cars, including the 3 millionth car with hydromatic drive. Olds suspended making 6-cylinder engines to fill orders for the hugely successful Rocket V8s. And there was sad news. Founder Ransom Olds died at home in Lansing with his wife and family at his side. He was 86. Before his death, Ransom was asked if he thought the automobile was here to stay. He left the business as he had entered it, musing.
I should say it was. The trouble is what you're going to do for parking space.
With government-imposed wartime production limits, it took the next 2 years for Olds to make the same number of cars as in 1950. But Olds workers weren't slacking. They added power steering and air conditioning options in some 1952 models. A ferocious fire leveled GM's Detroit transmission plant in 1953, temporarily halting supply of Olds' legendary hydromatic transmissions. But Dynaflow and Synchromesh trannies were substituted and production continued uninterrupted. With features like panoramic windshields and two-tone paint, Olds models continued to be hot sellers in the fabulous 50s. 1955 brought the very popular Holiday sedan, a 4-door hardtop. Like many other Olds innovations, the Holiday was a smash hit. The two-tone beauty soon accounted for 2/3 of total factory output, which included the 5 millionth Oldsmobile. Olds sold over 600,000 cars in '55, the best year of the decade. These models featured 185 and 202 horsepower Rocket V8 engines, 6-way power seats, power windows, scanning radios, and power antennas. Patty Page was one of several media personalities employed by Oldsmobile to promote its car lines.
Here are Johnny and Lucille for Oldsmobile.
The Golden Rocket 88 is here. Everything about it is new this year.
Commemorating its 60th anniversary, Olds introduced the Golden Rocket 88 model with a 277 horsepower rocket engine. But the car company that had given the world the most popular muscle engine, the Rocket, the same company that would soon release the so-called Chrome Monster, the chromiest car on the road, was now in a mood to economize. Oldsmobile's first major step toward improving fuel economy came with a stingy two-barrel carburetor that was standard on the 1958 Dynamic 88 series. Sales put Olds first in the medium price class and fourth place among all American car makers.
Bring in the whole family for riding a 58 Rocket. Your deal is celebrating the fact that Oldsmobile is in first place in the medium price field. You'll get the big deal of your life at the Oldsmobility Open House, and watch for me on NBC television.
Friends, I've been leveling my lens at some of the new 1961 Oldsmobiles. Oh, here's a little jewel. Take a look at this one. The hot new number for 61, F85.
Olds continued its product variety in 1961 with the new F85, an intermediate-sized car that was 2 feet shorter than standard Oldsmobiles. It came with a 155-horse aluminum engine and burned cheaper regular gas. The Cutlass nameplate also arrived in '61 and became one of the longest-lived and loved models in history. The Cutlass earned many distinctions over the years, not the least of which came from Olds customers, who often made Cutlass the best-selling car in America. With many model design changes coming up, Olds technical facilities were being stretched. So in 1961, a new engineering center opened in Lansing with twice the previous space. '62 brought another Olds first, the Jetfire Sports Coupe, with the first American turbocharged fluid injection V8 engine. Olds built less than 4,000 Jetfires that year, but sales jumped to nearly 42,000 in 1963. A major expansion was announced in '63 that totally revamped manufacturing operations at Olds. Employment rose to over 13,000 and production totaled nearly 505,000 cars. The accolades kept coming. Motorcade magazine named Oldsmobile Best Car of 1964, and the Olds muscle car, the 442, with its 4-barrel carb, 4-on-the-floor stick shift, and dual exhaust, earned Cars Magazine's Top Performance Car of the Year. '66 was a banner year for Olds. A new administration building consolidated many management functions, and the 10 millionth car was built. Back in '01, when city officials promised to build Olds employee housing, they couldn't have guessed that just 2 generations later, GM employment in Lansing would equal their fair city's population. Olds' crowning achievement in '66 was the Toronado, the world's first modern front-wheel drive V8 production car. Despite industry and press skepticism, front-wheel drive was terrific, especially in snow and mud. The superior traction and handling, more roomy interiors, and flat floors because there was no transmission hump permanently changed the industry, which universally adopted Olds' ideas. Olds workers had a nickname for the Toro. Because of its massive hood and the power they experienced behind the wheel, they called it the Mafia. Motor Trend magazine called it Car of the Year. The '60s and early '70s were known as the performance years at Olds. Designers and engineers put out the best high-performance muscle cars in the business, featuring great new lines, indestructible powertrains, larger displacement engines, and greater reliability. The '68 Hearst Olds was probably the most popular. But the early '70s emphasis on fuel economy, high gas prices, horsepower choking exhaust emission systems, and skyrocketing insurance rates brought this 10-year super fun era to a close. The distinctive custom cruiser station wagon was added to the Olds fleet in 1971 and became a family staple until the advent of the minivan and the sport utility vehicle. In '72, Olds released a golden anniversary model, an elegant '98 Regency sedan at the Chicago Auto Show. The styling and engineering contrast between this car and the original curved dash Olds were nothing short of amazing. Oldsmobile had remained true to the first company edict, building cars in as nearly perfect a manner as possible. In fact, Olds produced its 13 millionth nearly perfect car during the 75th anniversary year. As Americans danced to disco music, Oldsmobile sales climbed continually, finishing third in domestic car sales in 1972, 75, 76, and 77. Ransom would have been proud. The 70s marked many more milestones and firsts for Oldsmobile, not the least of which was that twice in 1976 and again in 79, Cutlass was the best-selling car in America. When Olds sold over 1 million cars in 78, more than half of them were Cutlasses. The million-car sales record was even more impressive when you consider that 77 was also the year of the Chevy mobiles, Delta 88s built with Chevy 350 V8 engines. Working around the clock, Olds plants were simply unable to make enough rocket engines to meet demand. So, like most automakers, Olds outsourced. Highly regarded Chevy V8 engines were substituted. But the company had underestimated the public's high perception of the rocket engine as a value-added Oldsmobile staple. Consequently, many buyers took advantage of the costly offer to replace those rocket-labeled Chevy engines for the real thing.
There's a lot of news in Olds today.
Gas shortages and rising prices sparked a rapid interest in diesel engines, which could run 700 miles or more on a tank of diesel fuel, which was much cheaper than gasoline. Again, Olds led the nation, offering the first diesel engines on 1978 models. Saving valuable design and delivery time, Olds V8 diesels were derived from gasoline engine designs. They were great sellers, taking 32% of the U.S. diesel car market in the early 80s. With government fuel efficiency standards adopted, Olds bought up 280 acres in Delta Township on Lansing's west border. The new site nearly doubled all of Oldsmobile's land holdings combined. Construction costs topped $500 million, the largest single Oldsmobile expenditure ever. The factory on this site was slated to make up to 3,200 V6 diesel engines a day. But V8 diesel mechanical problems lessened consumer confidence in Olds diesel engines in general. Interest in the more expensive diesel engines began to wane as buyers turned back to gas engines, despite a second oil shortage in '79. Olds quietly turned off the diesel tap in 1985. The 80s rode in on a recession from the oil and gas shortages of the late 70s and found U.S. car companies in deep financial trouble. Congress bailed Chrysler out of bankruptcy. Ford was close to it. And although GM was in better shape, analysts wondered how long the industry giant could last without downsizing drastically, or if it could do so soon enough. The 80s took Olds' production totals from 21 million to 30 million cars and featured the total reorganization of GM's North American passenger car operations. 83 sales kept plants in high gear. Oldsmobile offered 29 models, and the rear-wheel drive Cutlass Supreme was the best-selling midsize car in America, as Olds sales hit 1,007,559 cars. 3,000 limited edition, black, silver, and red 15th anniversary Hearst Olds Cutlasses also heated up the streets. In '84, GM reorganized itself into 3 self-contained business groups from its various divisions: Buick, Olds, Cadillac, VOC, Chevy, Pontiac, GM Canada, CPC, and the Truck Group. Each group would be responsible for its own engineering, assembly, marketing, and profitability. The group became the factory entity that manufactured nameplate cars, while the nameplate divisions like Oldsmobile were charged with the sales and marketing of their models. However, both BOC and CPC groups would engineer and build Oldsmobiles. This reorganization meant the Lansing factories no longer belonged to Oldsmobile, and the Oldsmobile-Lansing product identity was blurring for the employees who had forever built nothing but Oldsmobiles. For the 1985 model year, to become more competitive with foreign and domestic manufacturers, GM combined Lansing Olds and Fisher Body plants into the BOC group to build a single twin car line called the GM20. Production of the Delta 88, 98, and Cutlass Supreme were shipped out of town and replaced by the new Olds Calais, Buick Somerset Regal, and the Pontiac Grand Am. The $300 million changeover to smaller front-wheel drive cars marked the first time that cars from other GM divisions were built in Lansing. At 120 cars per hour, the GM20 line used more robotics and had the highest capacity of any plant in North America. Sales of Olds products continued at a high rate. Olds nailed down third place in domestic car sales with nearly 1.1 million cars in 1984. The 25 millionth Oldsmobile was built in Lansing, and GM converted the huge Lansing diesel engine plant to develop a high-tech four-cylinder engine to be called the Quad 4. There were three front-wheel drive newcomers for Oldsmobile in '85, the 98 Regency and Regency Brougham, and the Calais, which paced the 69th running of the Indy 500. Celebrating the 20th anniversary of the car that revolutionized the modern industry, Olds introduced a sleek, downsized Toronado for the '86 run. It featured a 165 horsepower V6 electronic instrument panel, inlaid leather cockpit seats, automatic rear view mirror, and many features that would not be seen on domestic cars for several years. 5,000 20th anniversary specials were produced besides the standard Toro models, which were billed as Oldsmobile's most luxurious cars. Over 128,500 Oldsmobiles were sold in September, more than in the entire year 50 years ago. Nearly 1.2 million cars were made in '86, the second best year in Olds history. But times were changing.
Hiya, it's me, America's oldest romantic baritone working with America's oldest car company, Burns & Olds. Like a top billing, older. Oldsmobile just reached 90. They're nice kids. I'm here to tell you about Oldsmobile's 90th anniversary celebration. You're gonna love the values. An opportunity like this comes once in a lifetime. In my case, maybe twice.
We're ready to do the commercial.
I just did it.
In 1987, the 90th anniversary of Oldsmobile, sales began to drop. Olds fell out of third place for good. Totals would not even get close to 1 million cars for the rest of the century. Slipping U.S. product quality, rising interest rates and gas prices, mistargeted marketing schemes, and overwhelming foreign competition taking 1/3 of the U.S. car market. Olds dealers wanted answers.
It is now a global market, and you got it, and you're here. So you better understand, if your customer has almost 50% more choice today than they had when we first got in third place. And each year that's been creeping up on us.
Besides straight talk, Olds retailers were also given a glimpse of things to come. The Oldsmobile Aerotech concept car was about to make big news. Oldsmobile would soon begin to restake its claim as a world leader in engineering and outstanding engine design. In August, a pair of Oldsmobile Aerotech set 2 new world speed records at the Firestone track in Fort Stockton, Texas. Legendary driver A.J. Foyt was at the wheel. Olds' new powerhouse Quad 4 turbocharged engine was under the hood. Foyt had a tongue-in-cheek suggestion for the speeding Bullet Aerotech.
I'd say this right here, if we could figure out some way to put 2 doors, which could be figured out real quick, and make this like a sports car, I bet it'd sell real good.
The 1988 Calais carried the much ballyhooed 2.3-liter, 16-valve dual overhead cam Quad 4 engine. Olds expected to ride this engine into the future, like it had the Rocket for the past 40 years. The Cutlass Supreme was awarded the Industrial Design Excellence Award for Transportation by the Industrial Designer Society of America. The Indy folks were also impressed. They chose the Cutlass Supreme to pace the 500. In 1989, Olds tallied the 30 millionth car, a red 442 with a Quad 4 engine. Reflecting the country's import buying mood, however, sales fell to half of what they were just 3 years previous. Oldsmobile's mid-size car customers were also shifting to vans and sport utility trucks. Olds needed to rebound even as GM was downsizing, so it entered the surging minivan market with the Silhouette for the Fall '90 lineup, targeting young and growing families. By '91, sport utility vehicles ruled. Olds hoped to get its share with the Bravada. With all-leather interior, V6 engine, and 4-speed auto-trans, the Bravada was positioned to take on the high-end SUVs, the Eddie Bauer Ford Explorer and the Jeep Grand Cherokee Limited. Sport utility sales went through the roof, and Bravada's Smart Track all-wheel drive gave it far superior drivability over all its competitors. Oldsmobile's 95th birthday was another good news, bad news year. Special edition Cutlass Supremes and specially priced cars were offered to mark the occasion, but sales continued to slip. Olds introduced the sporty Achieva, targeted for working women and young families. GM's Lansing plants built nearly 400,000 Achievas, Buick Skylarks, and Pontiac Grand Ams in '92, making Lansing the top car maker plant in the New World, beating out Detroit and LA and every factory in between. It wasn't enough. The accolades and achievements kept coming in, but Olds sales continued to decline. Focus groups focused, consultants consulted, and when it was over, an earlier advertising campaign seemed to echo the symbolic truth. The spots were entertaining, but they didn't sell cars. Ironically, Oldsmobile had been following its declining audience while not cultivating enough new customers. So amid press reports that Olds was about to expire, a rumor that GM denied, the company began to focus its products on younger, upscale, import buyers, baby boomers. Olds would completely reposition itself in the market. At the same time, GM was losing millions. Oldsmobile made yet another general manager change. John Rock rode into town in '92, becoming the third manager since 1985. Before leaving 4.5 years later, Rock was credited with rebuilding employee and community morale and creating the vision to totally reposition Oldsmobile in the market. Olds would completely separate itself from its sister divisions, Buick and Pontiac. Rock and his lieutenants bought and drove the imports that were dominating Olds' market: Hondas, Toyotas, Nissans, Acuras, and Lexus. They decided that Oldsmobile's single purpose would be to earn back the younger, more affluent, and better educated customers lost to the imports. It would mean immediate, top-to-bottom change in the way Oldsmobile did business. Olds would reinvent itself. Oldsmobile began patterning its business practices after GM's very successful hybrid Saturn. Retailers and vendors were sent to Saturn's team-building boot camp, where they learned new customer-first skills. Meanwhile, GM brought in marketing expertise from outside the car industry for fresh ideas. Brand management would be the way GM sales and marketing units would go to market, building equity in the vehicle brands.
Everything we do has to focus on one single thing, and that is the ultimate Oldsmobile customer. And that everybody has to line up and see everything through that customer's eyes. And in order to do that, it's going to take a change in the relationship with our retailers. It's going to take a change in our retailers' relationship with the customer base. It's going to take a change in Oldsmobile's relationship with the platforms and with the design staff. And that then you have to align all of these people to where they totally understand this vision and the change processes that are needed so that we can accomplish this vision.
Oldsmobile had always hung its hat on its product value and engineering prowess. Seeding the press late in the year, Olds announced a totally new car for '95 model year release. The 32-valve V8 Aurora would be a sleek, full-size personal luxury car emphasizing safety, comfort, and design. Aurora would feature a stylistic new logo, and for the first time since Ransom Olds' $5 car naming contest, nowhere on the car exterior would the name Oldsmobile appear. As the changes began to occur, deliveries to Olds dealers continued to slide from 600,000 in '89 to just 381,000 in '93. Sales were the lowest in 31 years, but things were beginning to improve. Innovation once again was the key. Another centennial newcomer, the Intrigue, was voted most significant car by Auto Week magazine at the North American International Auto Show in Detroit in 1996. Intrigue would join the Oldsmobile lineup in the spring of '97 as a '98 model car. The future was packed with many more examples of Oldsmobile's intentions to stick around for another 100 years. The all-new Silhouette van in '96 and a redesigned Cutlass in '97. Ramada was representing GM and Oldsmobile very nicely in the upper end of the sport utility market. As Oldsmobile's centennial flagship car, the Aurora was the best indicator that the new vision and centennial plan was on target. In an industry survey in its first year, Aurora matched Lexus in overall buyer satisfaction. 22,377 Auroras sold in '94, its first year. In October of 1996, General Manager John Rock announced his retirement. Darwin Clark, Marketing, Sales, Service, and Parts Manager of GM's very profitable European operations, was named his replacement. History would say that Rock had set the vision to give Oldsmobile its new product leadership. Clark's role was to execute that vision. Oldsmobile's strong racing tradition continued big time in the '90s, netting the best results ever in Olds' rich racing heritage. Early in '96, powered by Aurora V8s, Oldsmobile took first place in IMSA World Sports Car Series races at Daytona and Sebring, and another Aurora V8 took first in its GTS 1 class as well. The WSC car was invited to Le Mans in June, where a win would give Olds the triple crown in endurance racing. The Olds team was doing very well until transmission trouble ended the race prematurely. In January of '96, Oldsmobile announced that it would provide special racing versions of the Aurora V8 engine for Indy Racing League competitors, beginning with the 1997 Indy 500. Nissan would also supply engines. Oldsmobile Motorsports and its race teams hit the tracks testing Aurora V8s, which ran with unequal precision. Olds was asked to supply a minimum of 50 engines in a few short months. The first races of the new Indy Racing League series, featuring all new Indy-style cars and engines, were won by Eddie Cheever, the Indy 200 at Walt Disney World, and Jim Guthrie, the Phoenix 200. Both drove Aurora V8-powered cars. Then in late May,
ladies and gentlemen, start your engines.
An Olds Aurora paced the 81st Indianapolis 500. It was the 9th time for Oldsmobile. In its first competitive appearance at Indy, Oldsmobile engineering proved far superior to Infinity's. Aurora engines powered the first 16 qualifiers and the top 11 finishers. The best Infinity finished in 12th place, a full 12 laps behind winner Ari Lyondike. Through Indy, Aurora IRL engines had won every race, every pole position, and led every single lap of every IRL race. Oldsmobile has traveled a great distance in its first 100 years, but none greater than in its last 5. Aurora has set the centennial standard. And, like Aurora and all of the Oldsmobile centennial vehicles, this award-winning beautiful new car has all the right stuff to lead the industry into the new century. And reminiscent of Ransom's first directive from his board of directors, the name is nearly perfect.